Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. In 1975, Ian Douglas Smith was then the Prime Minister of Rhodesia, said if blacks were to rule themselves, they will be walking on sewage and think it normal. He made other predictions of how the economy would collapse, the infrastructure, the roads, everything. At the time, many blacks dismissed it as just another white racist abusing the blacks. But 44 years since independence in 1980, one has got to revisit that quotation. What is it that Ian Smith saw in the blacks that enabled him to predict with such uncanny accuracy? Because, like it or not, blacks are walking on sewage. Most of the infrastructure that he was talking about, saying it will collapse, has collapsed. Last month, there, there was a SADC meeting, and one of the guys posted the following on the internet with the remark, SADC missed this. Mbare walking on sewage. I think it is not only SADC, only Mbare, where this is a common sight. Many other suburbs in Zimbabwe, throughout the country, this is a common sight. Indeed, the sewage streams would have been even stronger were it not for the fact that most suburbs in Harare, in Zimbabwe, cities and towns, will go for weeks on end, sometimes months on end, without running water. Water has become a scarce commodity. Some of the infrastructure that we inherited at independence, the roads, the hospitals, the power generating plants, are in a sorry state 44 years after independence. One has got to ask, what is it that Ian Smith saw in blacks that enabled him to predict with such uncanny accuracy that we cannot govern ourselves? I would say one of those things is the blacks' punish to resist knowledge, to look at facts and detail with suspicion. One of the things that has been cultivated into us is to look at anyone who is knowledgeable as do not trust them. The bourgeoisie, the intelligentsia are people not to be trusted. Instead of embracing knowledge, instead of searching and valuing truth, we seem to reject it. We don't like order. We like things to be chaotic. Nothing is ever resolved because we never look at facts and value facts. Order. And one of those areas where this has come true with tragic consequences is our failure to hold free, fair, and credible elections. Zimbabwe is a failed state, and one of the main reasons why that is so is that we have, for the last 44 years, failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections. There are some things we should not be arguing about, and yet we are. We don't seem to know what constitutes free, fair, and credible elections. In 2008, ZANU-PF nearly lost the elections. And thanks to the work of SADC in 2006 and 2007, we had piled the pressure on the Mugabe regime to implement some reforms so that the elections were to be the nearest we've ever got to free, fair, and credible elections. And so the March vote in 2008 was the nearest Zimbabwe has ever got to holding free, fair, and credible elections. But before the results could be announced, Mnangagwa stepped in. SEC were told to stop announcing the results, and Mnangagwa and his group took over the process. This is Mnangagwa boasting about it.
2008 patakaita ma-elections pakaposa papinda Tsvangirai ndandiri election agent ya president. Ma-results abuda tiri party headquarters vamutasa vanga vari secretary vedu ve-administration vamutasa muripi ndafona ndiri kwarusapi komogwenda kwarusapi seka ma-results achibuda kudai vanga aiwa zvako izvo Mnangagwa ndezvako endaenda kumusha ofisi vanga vabisa zvinhu zvavo zvose watofunga kuti zani yadini yaparara. President ofona zvakamira sei kati ndomamira zvakaita takatodini katida sei manje mama ndikati abvudzai baba nditaure navo baba gadzirai politburo cabinet musarangarira zvimwe zvinhu gadzirai chi cabinet asi nangoda kuti muzive kuti 2008 ma-results abuda vamutasa vakatiza.
As a country we face a generational transition. Vana vesa vari kuma below 35, they are crying out for help. The country is in a mess. Arusurufaro. We know we are inheriting a mess. We know this country has been left with nothing.
I'm assuring you that starting from tomorrow, you'll see a different nation from what you have seen or read on the news about these results and everything. Where we are going ahead there, the situation will be very different. What we said to our people, they could not see with their own eyes. We are going to act as we see it fit. We are prepared to go the whole distance.
Well, nearly 500 people were murdered by ZANU-PF and its operatives, including the war veterans, the police, the army, and CIO that year in the runoff. It was the worst political violence, election-related political violence in the country, in the history of Zimbabwe. It all emanates from the fact that here is the leaders themselves. We have never really understood what constitutes free, fair, and credible elections. Mnangagwa was at the front of the 37 years of Mugabe tyrannical rule. And so it was surprising that in 2017, when Mnangagwa staged the military coup to replace Mugabe, hundreds of Zimbabweans, if not thousands of Zimbabweans, went on the street to support Mnangagwa in the coup protest. They wanted to give him another chance. Another chance to do what? This is a thug. Do you seriously expect that he will hold free, fair, and credible elections? He promised that he was going to hold free, fair, and credible elections. Of course, he did not. And so the country had the opportunity to finally address this stone problem of rigged elections. And we missed it. The 2008 elections results, SADC and the AU, for the first time, refused to accept and endorse ZANU-PF's victory. And so the country was forced to go into a GNU whose primary task was to implement the democratic reforms to end this case of rigged elections. Guess what? Not even one token reform was implemented. Morgan Changirai, whom we saw in that video clip, and his friends were bribed by Robert Mugabe during the GNU, and they forgot about reforms. They failed to implement even one token reform. And ever since the MDC ever since the GNU, the MDC have completely given up. And now they're in the business of convincing their followers that the country does not need democratic reforms because they've devised ways of winning rigged elections. There are some things that we should be agreeing on. And we should have agreed by now. It's, of course, totally nonsensical to believe that we can have a stable government when we have got a regime or a party like ZANU-PF given carte blanche powers to rig elections. We started on the right path. Let's implement the reforms. And now that has been abandoned. Last year, Chamisa told his supporters that he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. So the country can go to elections and Triple C was going to win big because he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. When in reality, we didn't even have something as basic as a verified voters roll. ZANU-PF went on to blatantly rig those elections. And thus we are where we are now. Here is a video clip of Chamisa lying to his supporters.
We reject this sham result and flawed process based on the disputed figures. We have our V11s. I'd asked our teams to bring those V11s. I'm not so sure if they're here so that you would see them. We have brought V11s from across the whole country, and those V11s are going to be the basis of our assertion. We have won this election.
The V11s, the so-called V11 that Chamisa was talking about, he was counting on Tim Pachedu to produce those V11s. The truth is, Tim Pachedu knew there were no, Chamisa did not have all the V11s. They've since come out and said, no, we only had 84% of the V11s, contrary to Chamisa's claim. And of the 87% of the V11 that they had, Mnangagwa was leading, not Chamisa. So this issue of rigged elections has come to the point now where the opposition has been participating in these flawed elections, knowing fully well that the process is flawed, knowing fully well that by participating they give ZANU-PF legitimacy. But they've participated out of greed. And what is annoying is that even with all that mountain of evidence, there are some Zimbabweans out there who still refuse to accept that MDC, Triple C are nothing more than ZANU-PF Team B. They've been participating in these elections, making sure that Team A wins, and that their participation is to give the process the modicum of credibility so that ZANU-PF can have legitimacy. So we come full circle. Ian Smith was right after all. We are incapable of governing ourselves. In my view, because we are incapable of facing the truth. We cannot even admit to ourselves that the present system has failed. We cannot admit to ourselves that we are walking on sewage. And we've been walking on sewage for so many years now that it has become normal. We cannot even admit to ourselves that this is not normal and do something about it. It is, of course, tragic that we are failing to get off first base, because I think without being able to implement the reforms so that we've got free, fair, and credible elections, we will never, ever have a competent government. There is a golden opportunity in 2028. We've got time to prepare for it. In 2028, we are not going to get ZANU-PF to implement any meaningful reforms. That is clear. ZANU-PF will never reform itself out of office. We will never, ever get Chamisa and company to force the regime to do anything about reforms. They don't care about reforms, Chamisa and company. All they care about is their share of the gravy train seats. We are not going to stop Chamisa and company participating in 2028 for a share of the gravy train seats. However, what we can do and we must do is make sure that we do not participate in the flawed process. This is easier said than done. We have got 2 million of Chamisa's supporters, according to the results of last year's elections. They participated in those flawed elections because they believed Chamisa's blatant, idiotic lie that he had plugged the vote-taking loopholes. Coming back to the point I made originally, that we have no respect for facts, for reality. We live in our own cloud cuckoo land world, and more so, these Chamisa Chete supporters. They believe anything that Chamisa tells them. No questions asked. A dangerous world. You can't reason with people like that. But we've got to get through to them somehow. Because if they participate in their millions, they will give ZANU-PF legitimacy in 2028. And this will perpetuate the ZANU-PF dictatorship. This will perpetuate the predictions of people like Ian Douglas Smith, who said we are incapable of self-government. I think we are capable if we only can face up to the truth, to the facts on the ground. And at the present moment, the most important thing is that we have got this pool of voters, this Chamisa Chete Chete Brigade, who, if we do not stop them participating in 2028, will give ZANU-PF legitimacy. And thus perpetuate the dictatorship and perpetuate the suffering. People walking on sewage, I think it's normal. Perpetuate the tragedy of schools, hospitals in such a sorry state they're not able to deliver those basic services, education and healthcare. If we think, I believe we can get out of this mess. Because nothing particularly challenging about Ian Smith saying it. It was obvious. It should be obvious. More so now for those of us with the benefit of hindsight. We can look back on what Ian Smith said and be honest with ourselves. What is it that he saw that enabled him to predict that we are incapable of self-government? I think that is blatantly obvious to me. There are some issues that we should not be arguing over because the evidence is there. What constitutes free, fair, and credible elections? The information is there. There's nothing scientific about it. It's not rocket science. We only need to apply it. The idea of participating in a flawed elections is the most idiotic idea that the opposition in Zimbabwe has tried to sell to the people of Zimbabwe. I think we must reject it resoundingly. We cannot participate in a flawed elections only to give ZANU-PF legitimacy and perpetuate our own suffering. That is madness. We must stop it. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.